and welcome to A Balanced Life with Dr. Jacquie here at Black Star Network. I am always excited when we get an opportunity to gather together to talk about, of course, all things balance. As we are moving into this third quarter of the year, seemingly we are falling into stress, getting back into our old habits and patterns, and really not thinking the fact that we just came through a pandemic. Today, we're going to be talking about some things that will really help us find our own space to begin to have a launching point for really staying clear on how to balance. We're going to be joined today with Stacey Owens, Pastor JT, Dr. Tierney, as well as Charlotte Avery. And we're also joined by a special guest, Janine Halloran, who will talk to us about all things related to mental health. You know, as we are growing and becoming a part of society and getting back out in the world again, we're finding ourselves stressed, not having the coping skills that we need because we've been away and been relying on old habits, old patterns, old ways of doing things. But as we begin to move forward, it will be important for us to put some new things in our toolkit. And we're going to talk about that. Welcome in, everyone. How are you doing?
Hello, Dr. Jacquie. Hi, everybody.
Hey.
Doing great.
Let me just tell you guys, you know, the more I'm out and about in grocery stores and we're all out in public, I see parents flying off the handle with their kids. I see parents not being able to cope when it comes to not getting the customer service that we need. Does it seem like to you all that we're kind of falling back into these old habits and patterns and ways of dealing with people versus really showing empathy, sympathy, care, and concern? Charlotte Avery.
I think it's situational because I've seen the parents fly off the handle, you know, even before the pandemic, and I see parents flying off the handle now. And so I could say maybe yes, but maybe no, because I think that if you didn't learn those skills before the pandemic, then when the pandemic came, you were in big trouble. And now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, you probably need a good lesson that we're teaching today.
Those good lessons are often hard to come by. Pastor JT, in your space, you know, I know I always ask you to come from the spiritual perspective, but you're really out and about working with males, females in organizations. Tell us what you're seeing and how you're engaging others to really step back and pause and take notice of their behavior in these wide open spaces again.
You know, that's a good point you bring out, Dr. Jacquie. And I'll just say this. I think what happened is many people didn't take advantage of the great pause, that thing that we just went through. I don't even want to call the name of it, but just when God hit the pause button and we couldn't do nothing, couldn't go nowhere. And I think what happened is a lot of people didn't take advantage of that time, right? So you talk about organizations and you think about professional people. We really didn't have a space where we could sit because we immediately moved from not being able to meet face to face to now we're Zooming more than the Commodores did. And then after we finally got back to a space where it was kind of okay to get back open, we rushed to get back in front of people. And in some instances now, some people still have the thought that we will be in meetings back to back, just as we were when we were Zooming. And I think what has happened is nobody really took time. And I know we have the self-care days and things of that nature, but self-care is a little bit more than going to get a manicure and a pedicure. We really didn't take time to process what went on and who came out on the other side after that pause button was released and that play button was now pressed. And I think what is happening is we are encountering people at different spaces in their day. So it may be a bright, sunshining morning for you at 9 o'clock, but for somebody else, it may be a thunderstorming 9 o'clock. And in some instances, we are expecting somebody else's day to be on the same page with our day just because it's the same time. And I think that's where we are being introduced to some people who don't have patience. They have a short fuse. They're more attitudinal. They're more emotional. And I think if we ever step back and offered the grace that we may need ourselves, then we probably would have a little bit more peace. Other than that, man, we are just a ticking time bomb waiting to explode.
You bring up a very good point because we literally are, as Beyonce says, back outside, back outside.
Mm.
Stacey, let me ask you this question as it relates to individualism, because Pastor JT just brought up a very good point that we believe that people should be where we are just because we may occupy the same space during the course of our workday or at school or wherever it is that we find ourselves. But the reality is we're oftentimes in our own head in those spaces. How are you helping others and managing yourself, the ability of being an individual while yet still dealing with others?
You know, everybody can only bring their individuality to the table. So we always talk about how it begins first with self-awareness, knowing who you are, what you like, what you don't like, how you're feeling, and then being able to go get in somebody else's sandbox and know how to bring who you are to that sandbox and be able to be open and respectful and understanding of who they are. And that can often be challenging because I think, like Charlotte said, in terms of it's selective, depending upon different situations and situational, depending upon different people, different situations of where we are in that process. I think just like what Pastor JT saying that in this pandemic we changed, but did we take time to really think about how did that moment affect us and change us to the point where I really understand how I am as an individual in this moment. And then how did I flush it? If I had anything that if I went from Zoom meeting and then jumping back out to the personal meetings, or if I'm a person who I'm not going to start my day until 12 o'clock, how did I flush any kind of trauma that came to me from that moment when we should have paused and thought about the newness that we have to go to? So that now that it's back, the world is back open and we're back outside, I'm knowing what I'm bringing to the table. I mean, I see all the time, every day, where people are really just still struggling with the impact of how the world changed and what impact change that had on them. And they really didn't take time to understand, like, this is really my new normal. So now I'm still trying to operate like I was operating before, or I'm trying to go back to something that doesn't exist anymore. And that sort of brings frustration. And I don't even know I'm frustrated behind it. I'm just out now playing in the sandbox, and I don't really know what rules and what norms are at the table.
Having norms at the table can definitely be different. Dr. Tierney, what say ye?
So when we're talking about how we're interacting with others, it's important that we first stop and look at how are we interacting with ourselves. A lot of times when we say people don't realize that they're frustrated and all of these things, it's because they're telling themselves in their self-talk, you need to do better. You did that wrong. You need to show up, or you need to get up earlier. And we're having these internal conversations where we're beating ourselves up for not being who we were before we went into the pandemic, or who we think we're supposed to be now that the pandemic is on the other side. We're on the other side of the pandemic. So it's one of those things where if you're not showing compassion to you, it's going to be really hard to show compassion to that, that mom with the screaming kid in the store. If you're not giving yourself grace, then you're not going to give grace to the person that is in traffic, right along with you. We have to make sure that we are first giving ourselves what we need, that we are taking a second to really short circuit that negative self-talk, that stinking thinking that we have going on about ourselves and what we think we should be doing at this point in time, and give ourselves that pat on the back to say, you know what, you're doing a really good job, so that then we can better see our fellow man in a more positive light and give that grace and that compassion and that empathy and that sympathy to them as well.
Absolutely. I want to invite Janine Halloran into the conversation, and then we're going to have a little bit more time with her. But one of the things that I'm hearing everyone talk about is sometimes you need help, and oftentimes we don't know how to seek help. Janine, welcome in for just a moment. Tell us who you are and what you do, and then we'll dive right into some deeper conversation with you a little later. Hey,
Sure.
Janine.
Hello, I'm Janine Halloran. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I've been working with kids and teens and their families for about over 20 years now. And I actually did work through the pandemic. So I saw kids on Zoom. So just like you're talking about Zoom meetings, I did Zoom therapy. And that was a challenge. That was a really big challenge. I saw some families before the pandemic, and then through the pandemic, and then I now see them still after the pandemic. I've had some shifting dynamics that have happened and gone on, but I've been working with kids and teens for a long time, working on coping skills. And it's always been a passion of mine to try and help people figure out What are the strategies that they can use when they are experiencing big emotions, when they are experiencing challenging situations? And the pandemic is a perfect example of that. What can you do when you are stuck at home? What can you do now that you have to go back out into the world? What can you do now that we're at this place in the world and what we're doing? So I love to be able to try and help kids and teens especially build those coping skills so that as they are getting older, when they grow up, they have coping skills and walk into the world as coping adults. That's what I'd really like to do, is start early so they can do it later. And I'm going to help the adults too. I'll get there eventually, but I'm working on kids and teens right now.
Well, no, I think that what you're saying is very valuable to us because we all, in some form or fashion, whether it's professionally or members of our family, we do encounter, as Charlotte Avery calls them, littles, middles, and bigs. And knowing how, as an adult, to work with your children when they're younger, when they go to middle school, and when they go to high school, and when they go to college is very important. When we come back after the break, I want to talk a little bit about peopling, because this may be where we find ourselves, and a lot of our frustration comes from people doing what people do. And oftentimes it's healthy, and other times it's just the most and too much. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. And as you can tell, there are going to be times in our lives where we are engaging with ourselves, with other people who may be all over the place. And sometimes figuring out how to rein in attitude, rein in behavior, trying to figure out when is a great time to just tell someone, as Pastor JT said, press the pause button. Let's have a conversation about what's really going on so that we can all get back into some semblance of normalcy. Now, we haven't talked about a new normal in a while, but I think that we're there. People being ready to develop what will look like a sustainable new normal. I want to invite Janine and Charlotte into this level of the conversation because something that Janine mentioned was, how do you help people cope? Charlotte and Janine, welcome in. Coping isn't easy, ladies. And there are times when we're working with our young people that there's so much attitude and angst. And I don't think they intend to be that way, but there are times when things are going on with them that we just don't understand that's happening. Charlotte is a mom of 7, wife of 1. And I want to ask Charlotte, how are you managing helping your littles, middles, and bigs deal with society today, which is not the same society that they had pre-pandemic?
That is a super duper question, Dr. Jacquie. You know, for me, having so many different age groups in our household and our family, you know, I deal with each person one child at a time because they're all so different. They all have, although they, you know, have some similarities, they're all different in their dynamics and how they communicate and how they deal with their emotions and how they cope. You know, I have some kids who are just so tearful and some kids who are just, you know, sometimes just getting their aggression out, whether it's through yelling, which is also some learned behavior that they learned from me. Whether it's just through, you know, going and moving away from other people and finding a place of solitude and being by themselves or journaling or whatever. It's really dealing with them individually and dealing with them in the season of life that they're in, because I can't expect for my 9-year-old to cope and be able to cope and have certain coping skills like my 19-year-old. And I can't, you know, expect my middle schooler to be able to have coping skills like my high schoolers. And let the truth be told, some of my high schoolers, I'm like, are you guys regressing? I think you guys have gone back, you know, a little bit or taken a few steps back and how you're coping. And, you know, so just dealing with them one child at a time, knowing that they're all different, and me keeping, as a parent, even in my own coping skills, I have to keep that and their individualism into perspective so that I'm not flying off the handle, so that I'm not having greater expectations from another child when they haven't even matured to a certain level. So for me, it's really dealing with them individually, one child at a time.
One child at a time. Janine, what does that look like when Charlotte speaks of coping skills? How do you get them? Are they learned? Do they just pick them up? How do kids get coping skills? And then how do parents get them in order to give them to their children?
You know what I think is really interesting is that coping skills it can be learned. Absolutely. There are some things that come sort of naturally. Some coping skills sort of come naturally because you see your parents doing it. So if you have a parent who says out loud, I'm feeling frustrated, so I'm going to take a walk. You're modeling, as a parent, you're modeling that behavior. So then your child will be able to pick up on that and say, oh gosh, if I'm feeling frustrated, maybe I should go for a walk. So I always like, when I'm talking with families, to start with something like when they're younger, talking about what emotions they're feeling and being able to label them, because as soon as you label an emotion, it's easier to self-regulate. It's easier to manage that emotion. So that's how I always have my families begin. Let's start with just understanding what our feelings are. So let's label it, and then let's figure out what we can do that is safe and healthy. So those are my two basics for when it comes to trying to figure out what coping skill is going to work, because it is so individualized. Just like it is individualized for all the 7 children in that family, it is individualized for every single child in the world, every single teen, every single adult. So when I work with kids, I have a framework of trying to go through different kinds of coping skills that they can use, but it is so individualized. That's one of the things that's really tricky about it. And it depends on what you're feeling. It depends on where you are. It depends on, what you can and can't do. Are you by yourself? Are you with another person? Can you do the thing that you want to do? So I always like to be able to introduce kids to a lot of different ways of coping. I like to talk with them about learning how to take deep breaths, about ways they can relax their body, ways they can move their body, and doing that all important work of processing, talking about what happened, talking about what we can do the next time. So absolutely, coping skills can be learned. It can just take a little bit of time, which is a little bit frustrating. As a mom of teens myself, I understand that.
Well, let's talk with Stacey Owens for a moment, because coping skills applied and coping skills learned, oftentimes there's a disconnect. Stacey, in your environment as an educator, administrator, charter school founder, you're dealing with staff and students. Talk to us about the dynamics of maybe possibly a day, or maybe I just say an hour in a day, when you are helping children and the adults around them manage their coping skills and expectations that you have.
We were just talking about this today. And, seasons are changing, things are coming in. And I was just sharing with my staff that we have a responsibility of first checking in with, our own temperatures, right? Just let's hold ourselves accountable. Are we getting in power struggles with kids? Are we still being intentional about helping kids to regulate their emotions and teaching them the strategies that they need? I love when my guests talk about labeling the emotions. That is so important. And that's something that you have to stick with every single day. You have to be intentional about being in tune with your surroundings, being in tune with how you're feeling at every point of the day, so that you can know how to regulate when you need to. So yes, that's something that I spend a lot of time talking to kids about as well, because we have to teach kids. I like to call it the art. So first, let's talk about accountability. So you're accountable for yourself and what you bring to the table, your words, your actions, your thoughts when you're interacting with others, right? And then, are you being responsible? Are you being responsible for thinking about what your needs are, as well as how you're interacting with others and what someone else that you're interacting with, what their needs may be, right? What's your reactions? Are you being responsible for your reactions? If you overreacted or underreacted, and then that T in the R is, are you teachable? Are you being able to listen to the feedback, the verbal and nonverbal feedback that your friends or the staff or the students are giving to each other? Are you looking at how someone is responding to what you're trying to share with them about how you hurt them or how you help them or so forth? I mean, that's the art of being able to come together and really manage how we're going to people with each other.
Ooh, people, and especially when they're little people. And I know later in the next block, I'm going to talk to Pastor JT and Dr. Tierney about adult peopling. But when we're dealing with children and the people that they come into contact with, how much is being projected onto them? Because oftentimes literally kids can be told to do a thing, but it may not be the thing that they would do naturally or, out of their own understanding. And people, adults specifically, have a way of projecting behaviors onto kids. Do you guys think that that's dangerous for adults to project attitude and behavior onto children? I'll give you an example that I'm thinking of, and you can bring Charlotte back in for this part as well. If I say to one of my nieces, you probably really shouldn't flick the lights off and on like that because your sister may, get an attitude. Well, I don't know if she's going to get an attitude or not, but because I said that, now I've projected a potential behavior onto a child, which maybe they wouldn't have even taken it in a negative manner. So oftentimes, do children, how does this come about, this projecting negativity onto kids and the danger that it has for them? I'll start with Charlotte.
I definitely think that it can be a very dangerous situation. And yes, I do think that sometimes we do that. I mean, I know, and I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of doing that sometimes because of how I know that some of my other children are built. And so sometimes I do project what I think might happen versus just kind of waiting to see if it will play out. And then also seeing how they will be able to respond to each other, because sometimes they don't need me stepping in to manage a situation unless it's like, somebody's like killing somebody or whatever. But sometimes it's good to just let them go ahead and sometimes do things and see how the other child is going to cope or how they're going to manage with each other. And so, yes, I definitely believe that it can be dangerous, because also I think what it does sometimes, it sets up sometimes like what we would call a self-fulfilled prophecy. So even when something wasn't going to happen, now you've created an environment and an element for something to possibly happen. And so I definitely think that as adults, we really do need to be careful about that, because I've not only done it as a parent, but I've seen teachers do it to other students in school and, things of that nature. So I think we definitely need to be aware, and I think we need to be careful.
Well said. Janine?
Yes, absolutely. I would totally agree. I think a lot of times as a parent, I've done it myself. I have the perfect example. My son lost at a soccer game and I was like, it's no big deal. It was a big deal. And I realized it as like the words came out of my mouth. I was like, oh, please let me take those back. So sorry. And that was a perfect opportunity for me to apologize and to say, you know what, it is a big deal. I can see that it's a big deal for you. I see that this hurts you. So absolutely. We don't want to be dismissive of their feelings. We want to make sure that we are acknowledging what they are feeling so that they learn to identify that themselves. They can do that themselves.
Absolutely. Stacey, any closing comments?
Yeah, I think we just need to create the situation where we are allowing students to express how they feel. We should direct the statements that we make in an open-ended manner that will open the floor and open the door for them to just be able to say, you know what, this is how I'm feeling. And then you can have dialogue about it. And be careful not to transfer your anger or your other emotions as well. So I'm mad at so-and-so over here, but I didn't get to say what I want to say to this student or this person. So let me go and take it out on someone else. That's another form of projection that we have to also be very mindful of.
I will agree with you there. Oftentimes people may understand what she just said as paying it forward. And oftentimes we pay forward both positive and negative. When we come back after the break, I want to continue this conversation related to peopling, but from an adult perspective. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. And as you can tell, getting your coping skills together, discovering what they are, and your natural responses to things can be a little bit difficult. But we are literally now out here in the world, hanging out at the park. We're going to concerts, picnics, barbecues. We're going to work more often. We're in the grocery store, at the car wash. We're in a lot of places, and we are seeing a lot of attitude and behavior that is oftentimes not considered polite in public society. Pastor JT and Dr. Tierney, come on in. Let's have some conversation about peopling. Because they are really out here peopling. just doing whatever it is that people do without any care, concern, or whimsy in the world. And I'm comfortable with people just being free, having a good time. But sometimes that can take a different turn. I'm going to start with Dr. Tierney. Talk to us, Dr. Tierney, about the ways in which we find ourselves engaging positive and negative, and how do we kind of rein these things in if we need to step in and then do some corrective action.
So it's just like what you just said, people gon' people. I mean, the sooner we really get that into our heads and just understand that that is just the nature of things, the better off we'll be. I think sometimes we get so bent out of shape and surprised when people, and it's like, people, that's what people do. We're going to people, and so not getting so offended, and so defensive when we see people peopling, and then not being so judgmental when people, so just in reference, the slap heard around the world, the Will Smith situation. Immediately when that happened, so many people had so much to say about that whole situation. And immediately when I saw it, I said, that man is hurting. It's something that's happening, with his situation. To not judge, yes, okay, that wasn't the best thing to do, Will. Okay, got it. We got all that. But when we can look at people and see the humanity that's there, when we can see that, they might be hurting or going through some things, then that takes that judgmental piece out of the equation, and we can really just stand in the gap with people and not be so judgy when we see people peopling, And so as we're navigating this, we have to make sure exactly what we just said about children. We have to make sure that as adults, we are being very aware of what we're feeling. In my work as a coach, I have the wheel of emotion. And that's the question that I ask my clients all the time. Tell me what you're feeling. Don't tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you're feeling. Because often as adults, we got the message that we don't have the room to feel. We don't have the room to process our emotions because we got to get to work. We got to make sure these kids is at school. We got to make sure the bills are paid. We got to make sure we do all these things. And there's no time for feelings. So what we do is we stuff those feelings down, and then they come back out. It's the only feeling that we like to acknowledge, anger. And so then we end up doing some destructive, things because we haven't first addressed our feelings of what we're actually feeling. And then we have the nerve to judge other people who are peopling and trying to walk through the feelings that they're not feeling. And so we're all just bumping into each other out here in the streets outside, and so just making sure that we're taking that time to understand that people are going to people. That's just what people do. And making sure we're doing our work to really process what we're feeling and then moving in that space of what we need to do for ourselves first, and then making sure that we're interacting with others in that compassionate way.
Absolutely. Pastor JT, talk to us about that for a moment. She said a lot of things that make some really good sense to me. And then I started having all these flashbacks in my head, like, am I peopling? Like she talking about peopling? Or am I staying in my good church girl faith lane and being loving and compassionate and all those kind of things? And sometimes it's a struggle. Talk to us about the balancing of it all.
That's a good word, balance. I think, and I love how these two segments kind of are building off of each other, because the peopling that you see that's happening in our now, they really are pictures of when those kids were kidding, because now we are just older versions of ourselves. And I know Dr. Tierney can, attest to this as being a coach, and I know I can do it definitely from the counseling space. A lot of what we are trying to help people navigate through in life, it's not anything that's happening right now.
Nope.
The root is coming from something that happened as a kid, a habit that happened as a kid. When you were first told no, when you stopped being free to believe, or the first time you heard somebody tell you, nobody in our family has ever done that. And so now you're in a space where we're getting you 20 or 30 years from that event, and we're trying to now help you to move forward by going backwards. So I would even venture to say, Dr. Jacquie, a lot of the people that we're seeing that's peopling right now, that's really a kid in a grown person's body that now feels like I can have my way. I can cry if I want to, and you can't say anything to me. And that's why now accountability has become so destructive that when we even attempt to tell somebody something, it's World War III. And so I think going back to what Dr. Tierney said, there are so many people that are in so many different spaces. And I think what happened, and I keep on going back to this great pause, man, that thing really, really, really exposed a lot in us that we didn't even know was there. And nobody is really taking the time to really do the necessary work. It kind of makes me think about Outback used to have this awesome blossom, and it would be like the fried onion, and it would just open up and just fold open. And you wouldn't know that all of those layers were in there when that onion was intact. But when you dug in there and you start moving it over, you start to see there were some things on this side that I may not have even addressed. That's on this side that I need to address, but it's all in me. And as long as I stay bound, I'll never have an opportunity for the help that I need. So I would even tell anybody that's on right now, it's okay to open up, because this is the thing that I don't want to have happen. That there may be an opportunity, or there may be a situation that pushes you to the point where you people at the wrong time in front of the wrong people.
Now that's a word. I want to ask Janine to come in for a second, because both of you, I have a question that I need to ask her. And it's that whole thing of, at what age do you start peeling back the layers? So if we don't want the 6-year-old self to show up in the 36-year-old board meeting, at what point do we begin to teach children how to pull back the layers, but also helping parents identify that the child is building up layers?
Oh my goodness. You can start talking with kids about their emotions when they're 2 or 3. And you can start very simple. You can start with happy, mad, sad. That is it. And you can start with that. You can start with that when you are looking at TV shows. So stop watching something like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, or you're watching Bluey, and you're talking about different emotions. You talk about the emotions that are in the characters. Oh, I wonder what he's feeling now. I wonder what they're feeling now. Do it when you're reading preschool books to them. When you're reading different kinds of stories to them. Do it when you're watching movies. There are so many opportunities that you can take naturally to start talking about those emotions and talking about how to manage it, and noticing that when somebody is having a big emotion. So I love using Elephant and Piggy books. Mo Willems, those books are so funny. Kids love them. Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. But it's an opportunity for you to see, this is how somebody's having a big reaction and it's funny, but what do you think could happen differently? What do you think Pigeon could do to help him manage his emotions because he can't drive the bus? So I love to be able to use that sort of stuff and start when they're little. I started with my own kids when they were little, and it really has paid dividends. And I've noticed it. The younger kids can start when we're just talking about, emotions are human. That's what we do. And we then being able to manage them as they get older. I love that. I love to be able to help kids do that sooner rather than later. So we're not all in therapy at like 45 and 50 dealing with it.
Well, I'd like to say they're probably all on our coaching Zooms, because literally we see a lot of young people behavior showing up in many of the older adults that we see. Charlotte and Stacy, tell us a little bit about, what do you do? Do you, as child educators, as parents, have things still in your space where you like, let's hold up the stick? Is it a happy face or a sad face? Or do you hold up, some type of an emotion, or do you have them, pause where they are and just say, tell me how you feel. Tell me, what do you do? Because oftentimes we're afraid to stop in the moment and address it. We grew up with this thing. We're going to talk about this when you get home. Some things you shouldn't wait until you get home to deal with. Charlotte and Stacy.
I am really big on dealing with my children where they are at that particular time, because like you said, Dr. Jacquie, some things just can't wait. And so I'm very, I would like, my children might say differently, but I really do my best as a mom to ask my children, when they're having big emotions, whether they're happy emotions or sad emotions or angry emotions, how are you feeling? And, when I was introduced years ago to the wheel of emotions. And so I pull that out sometimes with them, especially when they can't articulate what they're feeling at that particular time. we go through the wheel and say, okay, what are you feeling? Point to it, and then let's talk about it. And then it's not just what you're feeling, it's why you're feeling it, it's how and what caused it. And, and then it's really being able to problem solve and find a solution. And one thing that I love that our guest said was, allowing them to be able to have their voice in saying what they're feeling, but also letting them use their voice when it comes to, how to problem solve and asking them, well, what do you think should happen? Or what do you think should have happened? Or how do you want to handle this? And how can I, as your mom, support you in doing so? And so I think sometimes, as adults, we want to just be like, okay, it's really not that serious. You're just a kid. But it really is that serious because they're a kid. And we can't forget that because, unhealed little people become unhealed big people. And so my thing is to catch them when it happens so that we can move forward and press towards the mark of victory.
Absolutely. When we come back after the break, I want to start with Stacey because I want to continue this conversation. What do you do? We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. And as you can tell, what do you do isn't always that easy because we're in different seasons of life. We're in different spaces at different times. And we're around a whole host of people who are projecting both good and bad onto us. I want to invite Stacey in to talk to us about that for a moment, about how in the space in which she occupies, do we help people discover how to do the things that are required and necessary from wherever they may find themselves. Hey, Stacey.
Hey. I think, here at the school, I teach my teachers to have different time periods during the day where we can just have emotional check-ins. So right when our students get off the bus and enter the building, my teachers have things like bulletin boards up. They take attendance with using emojis so that students can identify the emoji that is matching their feelings right at that moment, so that if they identify a student who's coming into class before school even started with an angry emoji or concerned emoji, it leaves or creates space for them to be able to have those necessary conversations to help flush whatever needed to be flushed. That maybe something happened on the bus or happened at home or happened prior to entering to school. It allows them the time and the space to know that I need to check in, because if I don't deal with that right now, then it's going to grow into something more as the day goes on. And I also have them to do those same type of emoji checks midday and again at the end of the day, because kids and staff should know or be mindful of the emotional changes that they're going through throughout the day so that they can regulate themselves. We do a lot of journaling as well, and what we call fireside chats. So those are just conversations where we come around table, put a nice little quote up, and let's talk about it. It just create those spaces where we can have communication about what we need to do to make it through our day. Let's set the intention of our day early, and then let's adjust those intentions as we move throughout the day so that we can be productive and successful.
Productive and successful often can come from having roundtable fireside conversations. And I want to invite everybody in to have one of those right now, because we get into this space of saying, we don't want to be our parents. We don't want to raise our kids like we were raised. And there are a whole bunch of things going on when it comes to how do we help kids build coping skills and getting the one that they need. So let's talk about that. So what do you do? Charlotte, how do you do what you do with your 7 kids?
I just really try to give them the time and the opportunity to express themselves. I try not to be the helicopter parent that's always trying to rush in and fix everything. And I try to give them space and opportunity to be able to tell me what they're feeling, why they're feeling it, what happened. And I teach them and try to help them to problem solve for themselves. So it's not me fixing it for them, but for them to be able to learn how to problem solve on their own. I'm not going to even say on their own, but even with some guidance if they need to.
Where does that guidance come from, Dr. Tierney?
So it's one of those things where, and I love what you're saying, Charlotte, about what you do with your children while they're little and middles and going into bigs, because by the time they get to me and they're bigs, growns, adults, a lot of the work that we're having to do, that I do with my clients, is taking them back to their littles and middles phases. You know, my clients always tell me, like, Dr. T, I just need to know how to do this so I can just keep moving on. And I have to hit them with the no, ma'am, no, sir. We have to go back before we can move forward. And a lot of times my clients get kind of upset with me, you know, about that, because to use the example that JT mentioned last time with the onion, they're that tightly bound onion, and they're afraid of what they might find on the inside of that. They're afraid of what may happen if they start pulling those layers back. But really, honestly and truly, if we don't go back to where we first started to feel that notion of anxiety, where we first was told no, where we first gave up on ourselves or on our dreams, if we don't go back to that spot and really deal with it, deal with the emotions in that, then it's going to be very, very hard for us to move forward. Because honestly, a lot of us are walking around here bumping into each other, and our ID may say that we're 48, but really we're still that 8-year-old that's in the back seat of their mom's car, and they've just been told, wait till I get home and tell your father. And it's like, you know, and so we're still that little person that doesn't quite know how to address those feelings. But now we're 48 and feel like we can do whatever we want to, and we're just bumping into each other, creating a havoc.
I think we all have that fear. When you said that at that moment, it's like, oh, we had a flashback. Wait till I get home. Pastor JT.
Yeah, no, and to be honest with you, I took that note that you just made, Dr. Tierney, talking about that onion. You said they're afraid to open up. Kids innately are creative. They, as we would call it, they're getting into everything. They're inquisitive until somebody tells them no, until somebody tells them to stop, until somebody tells them to put all of that back in a bottle and tighten it up. Mm-hmm. And so then that moment, so I wrote this note, they are afraid to open up to us because they still remember that time when they were made to feel that yes. Opening up is something that they shouldn't do. Or they should be quiet, or, you know, the things that, you know, especially if you grew up in a house down south, you know, stop all that crying before I give you something to cry about, or especially if you are a man, you know, growing up, you know, I always heard, you know, boys don't cry, you know, man up. And so then now we have these older, as you said, 48-year-old men that they're still portraying out that first time that they were told not to feel. And so then now, if you think about it, if they never get the help, then now they are constructing a home where healthy dialogue about your emotions are frowned upon.
Yep.
And so then now it makes it hard for Stacy to really tap into that kid that is really having this emotional outburst and needs some attention, because Stacy is saying, it's okay, talk to me. But their only reference point is, or even as we were told, what happened in this house, stay in this house. And so I believe it's just so much. And, you know, I'm notorious for, you know, giving us a series of shows to talk about. But I think this conversation is we're really now getting into the how to, what to, because I really think that there's some people that's on right now who want to continue to be in the space that they're in now, and they just don't really know how. And I think that this conversation with all of us is really kind of opening that door for us to really kind of, even within ourselves, dig a little bit deeper and go into our toolkit and offer some suggestions that can really help people get in contact with their emotions and be okay with being emotionally free. So now they don't run the risk of building a prison that their child has to live in.
I want to ask Janine this question. What's the big deal about emotions?
Oh my goodness. Well, because we're all human, right? So we all feel them. But if we're told to stuff it down and only show happy, like I was told in my house, only happy is allowed, basically, it really makes it hard to be able to know what to do when you're experiencing all of those different emotions. So for me who grew up in a place where it was really hard to be able to, I got scared when I was told, wait till we get home. And so I shifted my language as a parent purposefully. I was purposeful in that. And I believe that's part of why I became a therapist, is to think about how I can talk to my kids in a different way that makes them feel like they can have any emotion and it's okay as long as they are safe and healthy, to be able in a way that they are managing it. So if they're having a hard time, I want to tell them, like, if they're having a challenge, it's okay. If we want to deal with something, if something big is happening, instead of saying, wait till we get home, my language is, let's put a pause on that. Okay. And we'll come back to it. Or let's bookmark that for later and let's come back to that. And then I use my own strategies that I've worked on through the years as in therapy and all of that, and working and doing all of this stuff, and being able to say, I need to go take a break. I'm going to go take a sip of water and I'm going to go take a deep breath. I'm going to go outside and get some fresh air. And then we can talk about this. So it really is, there's a lot of self-reflection that happens as a therapist and as a mom that has happened for me through the years.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask everybody to think about, while I ask Janine a second question, but I want everybody to think about, what would we challenge our parents to do or not to do? You can pick either one as we're moving forward with building toolkits for kids. But Janine, my follow-up question for you is, when should a parent decide to seek mental health care for their child?
Oh, absolutely. A great question. What I would say is, if it's starting to impact their schooling, if things are hard for them in terms of just being able to live life, like if it's hard for them to get up and go to school, and it's been happening for a significant amount of time, like more than a month, if they are losing interest in activities that they used to be interested in, if they are not talking to friends, if they are sleeping more, a lot more or a lot less than they were, changes in eating habits. So those are things that will happen throughout time, but it's one of those things, like if you're noticing that this is happening and it's a pattern and it's been happening for a while, then absolutely seek out mental health treatment for your child.
Absolutely. I'm going to start with Charlotte. What's your thing, Charlotte? What are we challenging our parents for?
I'm challenging parents to not weaponize the other parent, because I think sometimes as parents, and I've been guilty of this, I've been guilty of saying, well, just wait until your dad gets home, or we're going to deal with this when your dad gets home, instead of me just, kind of letting that be. I'm allowing him to be my out, and basically him being the disciplinarian when their dad should also be their safe place. And so I think, it's really important for parents not to weaponize each other, the other parent. Even if you're a single parent household, if your child spends time at, your other, your significant, your former significant other, or whatever, don't weaponize that parent also.
Absolutely. Stacey?
I would challenge parents to, start studying on how to increase your own emotional intelligence as well as the emotional intelligence of your child. Because when you have an increased emotional intelligence and understanding of that, it allows you to learn how to control your emotions, which then increases your motivation. And the higher your motivation is, that allows you to take those, lickings and keep on ticking without, falling apart within all of the different emotions that you can range. So increase your emotional intelligence.
All right. Dr. Tierney?
Right along with that, parents, reconnect with your 8-year-old self. Go back to your little and middle stage and revisit that place. It's okay. You will not fall apart. But the keys to your future, the keys to your forward is locked in the hands of your 8-year-old self. So go back and talk to her or him.
Absolutely. Pastor JT?
I want to extend and piggyback off of what Dr. Tierney said. When you go back and you have a little conference with your 8-year-old self, aim to be the parent that you needed at that age. Wow. And make sure that you are not duplicating what you have grown to hate, and you are it's embedding and coming out to your kids.
Absolutely. Janine?
Oh my goodness. I would say give yourself grace. Because when you do this work, when you are learning about all this information about emotional intelligence, then you feel, oh gosh, I'm not doing a very good job. It's okay to make a mistake. Think about it as a teachable moment. You can learn from this. Your child can learn from this. Give yourself grace.
Absolutely. When we'll come back after the break, I'll give my reflection. Welcome back, everyone, to A Balanced Life. And as you can tell, learning to parent yourself and parent your kids is not always easy. But the one thing that we can all agree on is that it does require balance. It requires you to have an awareness of who you are. It requires you to take responsibility for the things that you do or do not do. But it also requires you to take the time that is necessary to pour into yourself and into your loved ones. Thank you all for watching. Bye now.